look at verse 36, or chapter 36. This is the rebirth of Israel. And you notice what it says. Verse 36:1, prophesy to the mountains of Israel. We're talking about a literal geographic spot that God is talking to. Look at verse 4, to the mountains of Israel. Look at verse 6, therefore say to the land of Israel, say to the mountains, the hills, the rivers, the valleys. What are we talking about here? Are we talking, see, it's very easy in modern theology to equate this with the church. Why would the church ever be called the mountains, the rivers, the hills, and the valleys of Israel? See, this is a geographic spot that God promised to Abraham with an eternal covenant and to his descendants, which happened to be Israel. Verse 8, but you, O mountains of Israel, shall shoot forth your branches and your fruit to my people Israel, for they are about to come. This is talking about a return. Now, Ezekiel is writing from the Babylonian captivity. He is prophesying back to Israel, but Israel has not yet been fully, Ezekiel was just in the first wave. There are waves to come. And Israel has not yet been fully sent out of the land, and they do return a first time with Zerubbabel. But as we'll see in Jeremiah, if you want to turn for a second to Jeremiah 24, it's just the book before. It's interesting that in Jeremiah 24 and verses 6 and 7, Jeremiah and Ezekiel see prophetically two returns to Israel. They see two regatherings to Israel. And the first regathering, Zerubbabel came back after the 70 years. And the people kept in the land, and they lived there from the return after the Babylonian captivity in about 516 BC, all the way through to the time of Christ and John the Baptist, and Israel's living there in captivity, but occupied, but they're still having a nice time. But in AD 135, so the first time Israel was deported, 586 BC, is the first deportation that they returned 70 years later. And they live happily, not happily, there's a lot of fights, and the Greeks fight them, and the Romans fight them, and, there's revolts and all kinds of stuff. But finally, in AD 70, the Romans kind of have enough, and all they did in AD 70 is kind of wipe out the rebellion. But the Jews weren't willing to stop. And they kept fighting and rebelling and fighting and guerrilla warfaring. And finally, in AD 135, a guy named Hadrian, he's famous. He built the wall, that's still bisecting England, the Hadrian's Wall up there. He's one that built the Pantheon that you can still visit if you go to Rome and see. Yeah, he was an amazing builder. He was very methodical. And in 135, he killed probably millions of Jews. And every other one he expelled from the land that he could find and sent them to the furthest reaches of the world, of the Roman Empire. And he banned them from being in Jerusalem under death. And he personally, Hadrian, built two big temples. He built one on top of what we call the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is today. He built a massive temple to defile that place because that was where their temple was. And then he built another one over where the Christians revered Christ, and that became where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is today. But he just wiped them out. That dispersion, we call that the diaspora. That's when Israel was banned from the land. And Israel has not been a nation for 2,600 years. From 586 BC, they were not a nation in the time of Christ. They were an occupied place. They were not a nation. For 2,600 years, they were not a nation until 1948. That's amazing. Look at Jeremiah 24, verse 6. For I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them back to this land. I will build them, I will not pull them down. I will plant them and not pluck them up. Then I will give them a heart to know that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. Both Ezekiel and Jeremiah see something happening. What they see here, Jeremiah 24 talks about a two-part return of Israel to the land. The first part is a physical return. And that is just they get to the land and it starts blooming. Then there is a spiritual return where they began to seek the Lord. Now go back to Ezekiel and I'll show it to you. It's much clearer in Ezekiel. Jeremiah just alludes to it. But Ezekiel 36, look what it says. I will, verse 10, multiply men upon you and the house of Israel, and the city shall be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. I will multiply, verse 11, you, man and beast, and you shall increase and bear young and make you inhabited as in former times, and do better for you than at your beginning. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. Look at verse 17. Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in its own land, they defiled it by their own ways and deeds. And verse 19, so I scattered them among the nations. And I'm in Ezekiel 36:19. In fact, Ezekiel 36:19 to 22 is a summary of the Old Testament, basically. So I scattered them among the nations, and they were dispersed throughout all the countries. I judged them according to their ways and their deeds. And when they came to the nations, wherever they went, they profaned my holy name, and they said, these are the people of the Lord, yet these have gone out of his land. But I had concern for my holy name, for the house of Israel, and had profaned among the nations wherever they went. Therefore I said to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, I do not do this for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake, which you have profaned among the nations wherever you went. What the Lord is saying is, I drove you out of the land because your persistent disobedience. Israel was driven out in 586 because of their persistent disobedience and idolatry. They were decimated in AD 135, AD 70 to 135, because of their rejection of Christ. Have you ever thought about the fact that AD 70 is 40 years after Christ? 40 years he gave them to respond, and they rejected him as a nation. And finally he said, your house is left to you desolate, and it was in AD 70. Okay, keep reading, because what happens is in verse 23, notice the repeated usage of two words. Verse 23, and I will sanctify my great name, and when I am hallowed before your eyes. Verse 24, for I will take you out from among the nations and gather you out of all countries and bring you to your own land. Look up for a minute. Did you know Israel is one of the only nations of the world where the citizenship speaks over 100 different languages? The nation of Israel has over 100 different spoken languages within the borders. I'm not talking about people groups from valleys. I'm talking about people that have come there from the remotest parts of the world and have returned to the land. Why? Because I will gather you and bring you into your own land, which is what has happened. Look at verse 25, the third time. I will sprinkle clean water on you. Verse 26, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. Verse 27, I will put my spirit within you. This is the Old Testament statement of the new covenant that Jesus instituted at the Lord's Supper, that he talks about. It was primarily made to Israel. And there is yet a future event when this will take place. But as Jeremiah said, there is a two-part. They physically come back to the land in unbelief. Then they spiritually, and that's what 37 is about, but we'll get there. Verse 32 of chapter 36, not for your sake do I do this, says the Lord. Let it be known to you. Be ashamed and confounded for your own ways, O house of Israel. God says, I'm doing this for myself. Now, verse 36, the nations that are left all around you shall know that I am the Lord. I have rebuilt the ruins and places and planted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken and will do it. Verse 38, like a flock offered as holy sacrifices, the flock of Jerusalem on its feast days, so shall the ruined cities be filled with flocks of men. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. And then verse 37 is the regathering of Israel, or chapter 37, verse 5, I will cause breath to enter in you, and you shall live. I will put sinews, verse 6, on you, and you shall live, and you'll know that I am the Lord. Look at verse 12. This is fascinating. Therefore prophesy and say to them, says the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. When I was standing in the Valley of the Monuments, I thought, yeah, the Allies opened up Dachau and Auschwitz and all those. The people literally were on the verge of death. And these people were brought to the land of Israel. Look at verse 13. And you shall know that I am the Lord. When I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up from your graves, and I will put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. There's no way to say that the birth of the state of Israel is anything less than astounding. That after 2,600 years, they were granted for the first time in 26 centuries their own land. And they came from the far corners of the world. Then you shall know, verse 14, that I, the Lord, have spoken and performed it. And verse 21, same chapter 37, then say to them, thus says the Lord, surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations wherever they have gone, and will regather them from every side and bring them into their own land. It is over and over repeated. They're going to a geographic spot. They're going back to the spot of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do you know what the United Nations offered them? A spot in Kenya or somewhere down there. They said, don't you want it down there? And they said, no, we want to go here. And they said, what do you want to go there for? Why don't you go to Africa? God put it in their hearts. They wanted to go to their own